Hey, RetconRaider here. Today I thought we'd take a look at a relatively new game that was just announced earlier this year. Today I thought we'd talk about Phantom Doctrine by Creative Forge Games. So what is Phantom Doctrine? Well, we don't know much about it just yet, but from what they've told us so far, it sounds like it's essentially going to be a turn-based tactical strategy game, with a heavy focus on stealth and espionage, as well as an XCOM-inspired global strategy layer, all set against the backdrop of an anachronistic Cold War setting. It's an unusual combination, but this isn't the first time that Creative Forge Games has dabbled with this sort of genre mashup. Creative Forge is probably best known for developing another game, Hard West, a turn-based tactical game that took place in a supernatural frontier western setting. But while I certainly loved Hard West, and I hope to talk about it a bit in the future, I think it's safe to say that Phantom Doctrine looks like a much more ambitious project. In Phantom Doctrine, the player will take control of a global counterintelligence operation called the Cabal, which has been tasked with putting an end to a global conspiracy that is pushing the nations of the world ever closer to the brink of World War III. To do this, the player will have to recruit and train operatives, secure resources, establish contacts, and then take direct control of their operatives during high-stakes, turn-based tactical ground missions. These missions are handled with a conventional turn-based tactical system, using multi-level grid-based maps, but with a twist. While it is entirely possible for the player to go in heavy, storming an enemy compound with heavily armed and armored soldiers, it may often prove more prudent to make heavy use of advanced planning and espionage to reduce the risk to your organization. Stealth will play a heavy role in most missions, as the player directs their operatives towards hacking computers, picking locks, quietly dispatching heavily armed guards, stealing vital intelligence, and even assassinating high-profile targets. Many of these goals can be made easier by infiltrating enemy facilities in advance with undercover agents who can assist your strike teams from within, and with proper tactical planning, the player may even be able to finish entire missions without ever raising an alarm. But when things call for a heavier hand, the player will also have other more extreme tactics to fall back on. The game will feature things like variable overwatch and simultaneous breaching actions, which will allow the player to efficiently control choke points or take out an entire room of enemies before any of them can call for help. And in those rare cases where a mission hangs on the brink of complete disaster, the player can even call in support from remotely positioned snipers or precision airstrikes to quickly and loudly turn the tide in their favor. Not that it's always a good idea to outright kill your enemies. The player can also obtain valuable intel by capturing and interrogating enemy agents, or even converting them with proper leverage or brainwashing technology. But it's important to remember that the agents of the global conspiracy have access to all of these things as well, and over time the player may find their own facilities infiltrated by undercover operatives, and their own strike teams being brutally wiped out by airstrikes and ambushes. The player will need to protect their facilities and operatives with things like false paper trails, forged documents, and cosmetic surgery, while also continuing to build up their own stockpiles of advanced equipment, either through research and development, or outright theft from their rivals. At the moment, the developers are planning to include two main campaigns in which the player will either take the role of a KGB counterintelligence operative or a CIA Wetworks commando, allowing them to explore the story from two distinct points of view. And there are also plans to allow for a New Game Plus mode, which will unlock an additional protagonist, likely tied to the global conspiracy that the story revolves around. The developers at Creative Forge Games also seem to be taking replayability into account, stating that the story-driven campaign will include things like randomly generated character names and backgrounds, modular and algorithmically populated maps, and randomized intelligence snippets to ensure that no two campaigns ever play out exactly the same way. Overall, I think Phantom Doctrine sounds like a very intriguing premise. It's an unusual setting for a turn-based game which may make for some very interesting gameplay. Like I said before, we don't know much about the game just yet, but from what we've seen so far, I can safely say that I'm very interested in finding out more. Though it may be a while. The game is still in active development, and for the moment the official release date is a somewhat vague 2018. So for now, I guess we'll just have to wait until they feel comfortable sharing more about this fascinating new take on the turn-based tactical genre. But for now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phantom Doctrine, you can find out more about the game by visiting the store page on Steam, or by checking out the official gameplay trailer on YouTube. Links are in the description.